Hey, what's going on? I wanted to post a video showing how I am kind of showing a couple tools I use. I use these three tools a ton, and how I'm making do without a table saw. So, short and long of it is, when I first started to work on houses, I had a little contractor table saw. Somebody gave it to me, and it was super inaccurate most of the time. You're trying to get stuff to work and everything's moving, and it's kind of a cheap little saw. Also, I did not like working with it. You know, those little contractor saws, a lot of times they're sort of tipping over as you're pushing stuff through. Everything's kind of flexing because everything's kind of made cheaply. I wouldn't get very good results, and I didn't like the safety aspect of working with those little guys. You can buy something called a saw stop if you want to stay in that world. Supposedly it's a lot better and it'll stop the blade. It's great. But I went ahead and went with this Festool system, and I love this system. I've been using it for a couple years. So Festool didn't buy any of these tools for me. I went and bought them with my own little hard-earned money. So I wanted to show a real-world application, how I work with it. Again, I'm just a homeowner, woodworky guy, and kind of show how I work with it and how I can do just fine without a table saw. So this real world application, I am replacing the sill that goes underneath the door. All right, so this is solid oak. It comes from the store looking like this. And I need to cut a couple grooves in it for this 100-year-old piece of brass sill plate. So I want to cut the grooves. If you could even find this at the store with grooves, they wouldn't fit, I guarantee you. They don't use these anymore, so, or I do at least, but it needs a particular depth, a particular width, particular spacing and everything else. So I'm cutting it here, and this is my typical getup. I usually have this piece of foam insulation. I've been using this one for like 2 years. You can see the previous cuts that had to go all the way through. You can see these little lines in there. That's from cutting all the way through the wood. In this case, I don't need to do that. So with this tool, I can actually set the depth very, very precisely to get just the right amount of depth into my workpiece. So what I did, and this is typical for like a little piece of wood, which is a little harder to work with than like a big piece of plywood. I just use some painter's tape. I stick it down, straight down to this little foam board. Then I'll get rid of that little piece of tape. Then I'll throw my little track on top. Now you notice I have another little piece of wood here. It's about the same little piece of scrap here, about the same depth. And what that'll do is it'll give me a nice flat surface to work on. I'll get that tuned in right to where I need to make the cut. Just remember, when you're making a cut on this kind of thing, and this applies to any saw, if you want to cut on a line and have all the wood on this side uncut, you're gonna need to just cut straight down the line. But if you're trying to cut on the line and leave all the wood on this side uncut, you have to compensate for the thickness of the blade. So in this case, I'd come over about 3 millimeters and I'd have it right there. You get that, you can see it by eye in about 2 seconds after you've done this a few times. Once I get it all in position, I just throw a little more tape on top, and obviously bigger than that. Throw a piece of tape on top, everything's locked together, cut through the tape, no big deal. What's nice about this, particularly in an old house, occasionally you gotta cut weird angles. So you might be able to plot out, okay, it's a 11.2 degree angle. All you gotta do with this is mark your 2 points that you wanna go between, and then you can just move this just like a ruler. So, you almost think about this more like it's a ruler. I rule it, I get it right in the right spot where I want it, and then cut it, and any 2 points, any 2 depths, it works out fine. In this particular case, I have to actually make 2 cuts right next to each other. This doesn't have a dado or anything like that in the saw, so I'm gonna make 1 cut, and then I'm gonna move the ruler, or move the track over just a teeny bit and make another cut. I'm doing that because this particular piece is a little thicker than the thickness of the blade. So I did a little test practice ahead of time, make sure everything was gonna fit right. And if you do that and you get everything locked in there, when you put this piece on, it's now totally locked in. You can see it's inset exactly the way I wanted to get it set in. I even was playing with the depth. Now it's in there, perfectly aligned. You know, it's just solid. I mean, it's just solid. So that is a real world application of how to use a track saw. Again, you know, I keep this little piece of foam, I keep some painter's tape around, and I just go to town. I use two different tracks. This is the track that originally came with my saw. I did buy this saw new. So it came with this 1080 length track that's a metric length. It's basically like a little over, I don't know, maybe 3.5 feet or so. I searched around forever on Craigslist and I finally found a guy that was selling some old tracks that he didn't want anymore. So I picked up this 3000. I do use this a lot. I think there's one more that's like 5000. I don't know when you'd need that other than cutting like a floor in a gymnasium. You could put the tracks together if you need to get a lot more length, but this is already long enough and unwieldy enough that I wouldn't get a longer track than that. So basically just those two tracks. I've never had to link them together, and I've cut some pretty big pieces of flooring that I'm trying to get to butt up together. So those two tracks. This particular saw is the TS55 REQ. This is perfect. There's a bigger saw. I was debating about the bigger saw for a while. This does 99.9% of what you're gonna do. If you're cutting something really thick, there are other tools and tricks you can use to cut something super thick. But this is all I've ever needed. I've never run out of depth on this saw. So it works amazing. The other tool I use a lot is this Festool KS120 EB. This is the the chop saw that I use all the time. I love this thing. I mean, it's so accurate. I had along with that contractor table saw, I had a very cheap chop saw. I can't even describe it. This you can dial in the degrees, and it's like working with, a Swiss watch compared to working with a ancient crappy tool. This is just amazing how accurate it can be. It's super nice because when you're using it, it actually draws two laser lines. The spots between the laser lines are where you're not going to have material anymore. So you don't even have to worry about the thickness of the blade. You just look at the laser line and line it up, and that works amazing. I did get this little table to go with it. What I do a lot is I use this almost like a little vise. So when I'm working on something, I need to cut a little piece of wood, I'll just lock this in position here. And then with a handsaw, or even using like the old DeWalt, I forgot what it's called, but using that little saw, you can cut whatever you need, a curve, anything weird that you have to do. Just kind of, it's almost like a little workbench up here. The other thing I have that I love is this little CT26 vacuum. What's super nice about this vacuum is this is the slightly larger hose. And again, these green hoses are anti-static. So this slightly larger hose, you can take it off of this saw and it fits right onto this saw. So all you got to do is switch the plugs from one to the other. Just unplug this saw, plug in the Kapex, and then switch the vacuum spots, and you're switching right between tools in a couple seconds. That's super helpful because a lot of times you're cutting something here, you're like, oh, I got to take a little tiny bit off the end. Let me go up to the Kapex and just cut that little piece off. The rest of my little setup, I'll just run through it while I'm looking at it here. I use this as my toolbox. I just literally throw everything up there. That's supposed to be where the hose goes, but I just chuck all the tools I'm working with, throw them up there in a little mess of tools, and it works great. It's kind of a nice little place to keep everything loose. It's actually designed, and this is something I love that Festool has done. This one I got, again, used from a friend. The reason he sold it to me cheap is because this top piece was cracked. Well, Festool just updated this, and I just bought an updated piece that has this little sustainer lock. So I love that now you can put your sustainers right on top and even lock them directly to the top of this. I love how you kind of update things as you go along. These are my sustainers, mostly sanders and stuff. More workspace, so I don't keep them directly on top of that. I just use it as more workspace to throw tools like this little Japanese saw and stuff. It just ended up there because I was cutting some little pieces that I had to cut more precisely on top of here. So yeah, those are between the Kapex, the little Festool vacuum, the CT26 and this TS55 REQ, and these two longer, the shorter and the longer track. I haven't really run into anything that I've been working on the house that I haven't had the correct tool from a cutting point of view. I have some sanders, they work amazing. The little Fein multi-tool works amazing. The Dremel, you gotta have that, and then you gotta have a couple DeWalt tools around because I use them all the time. In fact, my favorite tool in the entire world, even more than those, if I only had one tool, this old DeWalt Impact. Oh, this thing is flipping amazing. This thing is like built by some smart, tough guys. All right. Well, I hope that helps somebody who's trying to put together a shop and doesn't want necessarily go the old school route of getting some cheap table saw and going from there. All this folds up, goes in a box, easy to move around. I work right in the workspace. I don't have to, sand and dust is not a problem. Literally, I'm just working here. I'll take this little piece, put it up, clean up, and it'll be back to normal in 10 minutes. So hope that helps somebody out there, and good luck.